Texas, Ohio, Georgia. These three states have just seen the first tangible moves under Japan's unprecedented $550 billion pledge to the United States. Yet most Americans barely understand the scope of this commitment, how it operates, or whether it can fulfill the grand promises tied to it. Back in July 2025, the Trump administration unveiled what remains the largest single foreign investment in U.S. history. Japan committed $550 billion aimed squarely at revitalizing and expanding the nation's foundational industries. The focus spans semiconductors, liquefied natural gas, critical minerals, shipbuilding, pharmaceuticals, artificial intelligence infrastructure, and quantum computing. This agreement also came with a reduced tariff rate on Japanese goods, set at 15% instead of the initially threatened 25%, accompanied by pledges of hundreds of thousands of American jobs. By February 2026, the first three projects gained formal approval. An LG facility in Texas's Gulf region, what was described as the largest gas power plant in American history in Ohio, and a critical minerals plant in Georgia designed to lessen U.S. reliance on Chinese supply chains. Economists at the Peterson Institute for International Economics immediately raised the pressing question: how much of this $550 billion represents truly new investment versus plans Japanese companies had already intended? The answer will reveal whether this initiative genuinely creates American jobs or merely becomes an expensive public relations statement. This breakdown focuses on structural data to provide transparency, because American workers deserve clarity, not headlines alone. The funding structure itself is a critical piece of the puzzle. The formal Memorandum of Understanding was signed on the 4th of September 2025, establishing the Japan Strategic Investment Facility, active from October 2025 through March 2029, coinciding with the conclusion of Trump's second term. All $550 billion must be committed before January 19, 2029. Project selection is overseen by the U.S. government, with recommendations from an investment committee chaired by the Commerce Secretary, and final approval resting with the President. Japan has 45 business days to decide on funding each project, and if it declines, the U.S. President may impose retaliatory tariffs. The funding originates from the Japan Bank for International Cooperation, JBIC, Japan's government-affiliated development finance institution, comparable to America's International Development Finance Corporation. Japan's Finance Minister Katsunobu Kato outlined three primary mechanisms. First, dollar-denominated JBIC bonds issued on international capital markets. Second, loans in yen directly from the Japanese government to JBIC. And third, the most significant, transfers from Japan's foreign currency reserves, which totaled $1,324 billion as of August 2025, explicitly described as a near-limitless supplemental source of funding. Analysis from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis in November 2022 concluded that mobilizing $550 billion represents roughly 12% of Japan's entire 2024 GDP, a sum feasible through coordinated use of the GPIF, JBIC, and foreign reserves, but requiring deliberate, sustained governmental effort over 3 years. The 9 strategic sectors targeted: semiconductors, pharmaceuticals, steel, shipbuilding, critical minerals, aviation, energy, automobiles, and AI quantum computing, are precisely the industries where American industrial capacity has eroded most over 2 decades of offshoring. Strategically, the logic is strong. China's recent export restrictions on legacy semiconductors from Nexperia threaten to halt substantial portions of the global automotive sector. Meanwhile, U.S. semiconductor production remains a fraction of what national security demands. The Alaska LNG project, a $44 billion facility that Japanese energy companies had long eyed but previously deemed insufficiently profitable, now benefits from loan guarantees provided through the $550 billion fund, altering the financial calculus and enabling projects that would otherwise not proceed. Analyses from the Hudson Institute confirm that in critical sectors, these investments are essential for project viability. The fund functions as a genuine catalyst. It transforms strategic intentions into executable projects. The 3 projects already underway illustrate the impact clearly. Texas's LNG facility boosts American energy export capacity, while immediately generating construction jobs. The Ohio power plant, poised to become the largest in American history, tackles the energy bottleneck Mitsubishi Electric representatives identified as the primary constraint on data center expansion and AI infrastructure deployment across the United States. The critical minerals facility in Georgia directly confronts China's restrictions on rare earths and vital materials, a choke point that has been creating vulnerabilities in U.S. defense and technology manufacturing. Yet the unvarnished truth that American workers need is more complex. This is where the headlines meet the reality check. In March 2026, the Peterson Institute questioned the authenticity of the commitments. For countries like Japan, South Korea, Switzerland, and Taiwan, the pledged investments could be realized simply by redirecting existing foreign capital, leveraging financial guarantees, and applying pressure on institutional investors. The operative word here is redirection. Japanese firms, including Toyota, SoftBank, Sony, Honda, and the Japanese operations of TSMC, had already planned substantial investments in the U.S. prior to this announcement. Within the $550 billion framework, much of what was already intended can be reclassified as fund-backed, inflating the headline figure. Analyses from the Hudson Institute acknowledge this inherent tension. Investments made independently by Japanese companies, outside the formal fund, do not legally count toward the $550 billion, even though they achieve the same goal: more foreign direct investment flowing into American industry. The agreement is not a binding trade treaty. Japan's trade negotiators confirmed this publicly. The White House released its version of the deal while Japanese officials were still returning home. Commitments signed during the October 2025 ceremony in Tokyo represented expressions of interest, not legally binding contracts, signed construction agreements, or actual workforce hires. Real investment requires time. Semiconductor fabrication plants take 3 to 5 years from groundbreaking to production. LG facilities need 5 to 7 years from approval to first delivery. Critical minerals processing plants face environmental permitting and supply chain challenges that cannot be rushed regardless of available capital. Japanese private sector representatives have cited regulatory bottlenecks as the biggest obstacle to delivering within the fund's timeline. The $550 billion is real as a commitment, but the promised jobs and industrial revival depend entirely on execution, which unfolds over years, not headlines. The first tranche has been confirmed, 3 concrete projects totaling $36 billion. A $33 billion natural gas-fired power plant in Ohio is set to become one of the largest in U.S. history, providing electricity sufficient to power sprawling data centers and AI infrastructure. In Texas, a $2.1 billion deepwater crude oil export terminal expands LG's American export capacity to international markets. Meanwhile, a $600 million synthetic industrial diamond plant in Georgia directly reduces reliance on Chinese supply for a material crucial to advanced semiconductor production. A second tranche of $73 billion has been confirmed, targeting energy infrastructure projects, including small modular reactors and additional gas generation. These are real investments, real projects, and real construction timelines. The implications for American workers must be understood project by project, sector by sector, along with the genuine risks to full delivery. Take the Ohio power plant. This is where Japan's investment addresses the single most pressing bottleneck to U.S. industrial competitiveness: power generation. The build-out of artificial intelligence infrastructure, data centers, semiconductor fabrication facilities, and the transition to electric vehicle manufacturing all demand massive amounts of electricity. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick described the infrastructure gap clearly. Japanese firms supplying gas turbines, transformers, and cooling systems are not just expanding energy capacity, they are enabling the scale-up of American AI infrastructure. The $33 billion Ohio plant tackles the power bottleneck identified by Mitsubishi Electric Power representatives as the most significant constraint on U.S. data center expansion. This is not abstract policy. It is the tangible foundation for technological competitiveness over the next decade. Equally strategic, though less publicized, is the Georgia synthetic diamond facility. Industrial diamonds are essential for cutting, grinding, and polishing tools used in semiconductor fabrication, aerospace production, and advanced defense components. Historically, China has dominated synthetic diamond manufacturing, leaving American producers exposed to supply chain risks. These vulnerabilities are exactly what China's export restriction strategy can exploit. By establishing a domestic synthetic diamond plant, the U.S. fundamentally alters that risk calculus. The $600 million facility creates supply chain independence with immediate implications for defense, semiconductor production, and broader industrial manufacturing. In February 2026, Japan's Trade Minister Rei Akazawa publicly acknowledged that significant gaps remained in priorities and interpretations of the deal. That statement from Japan's chief negotiator is arguably the most critical line in this story, though it received little attention in U.S. media. Gaps exist. Interpretations differ. The deal was announced while Japanese officials were still in transit home. Yet despite all these nuances, the $550 billion commitment itself is genuine. Execution of the deal is very much a negotiation in progress. At a private sector conference hosted by the Hudson Institute, Japanese companies highlighted the main risk to implementation: regulatory and permitting delays. Several firms noted that differences between federal and state regulations have already caused substantial setbacks in their existing U.S. projects. The $33 billion Ohio power plant, the flagship of the first tranche, will undergo federal environmental reviews, state utility commission approvals, grid interconnection studies, and potentially multiple rounds of permitting across various agencies. None of these steps are unique to this agreement, but they all require time. A scarce commodity given the January 2029 deadline. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick indicated that Washington will likely relax visa rules to allow foreign professionals, particularly Japanese engineers, construction supervisors, and technical trainers, to enter the United States for the purpose of building factories and training American workers. This aspect is significant for domestic labor. The agreement also incorporates a Japanese vendor preference. Japanese companies will be prioritized as vendors and suppliers for projects financed through the facility. Japan retains 10% of the profits, while Americans receive 90%, along with the associated jobs, infrastructure, and supply chain security. However, Japanese industrial firms constructing these plants will bring their own specialized technical teams during the construction phase. The benefit to American workers is real, but comes in phases, materializing after construction is completed rather than during it. A central analytical question arises: additionality. This represents the most rigorous challenge to the deal. The Peterson Institute asked directly whether the $550 billion represents truly new investment that would not exist without the framework, or if it primarily reclassifies Japanese companies' pre-existing plans into the fund's accounting. Researchers at the Hudson Institute also recognized this tension. Investments made independently by Japanese firms outside the fund do not formally count toward the $550 billion, even though they achieve the administration's goal of increased foreign direct investment. Many projects highlighted at the October 2025 ceremony were preliminary, emerging from exploratory discussions rather than detailed binding commitments. The honest conclusion is that both realities are true simultaneously. A portion of the $550 billion is genuinely new investment, catalyzed by tariff threats, loan guarantee support, federal land access, and profit-sharing structures that render previously marginal projects financially viable. The Alaska LNG project, valued at $44 billion, is a clear example. Japanese firms had repeatedly hesitated on this investment, but the fund structure turns it into a probable and actionable project. This represents true additionality. Another segment, however, consists of repackaged existing initiatives. For instance, Toyota's battery plant in North Carolina, already under construction at a cost of several $billion, exemplifies an investment that existed prior to the framework, yet may be included in the overall total. The International Monetary Fund's 26 Article 4 mission explicitly noted that Japan's $550 billion commitment could divert investment from other regions, such as Southeast Asia or Africa, toward the United States. While beneficial for American workers, this does not create entirely new capital. It reallocates existing resources. The Eurasia Group emphasized that in 2026, the critical question will be whether Japan can accelerate investments at the speed the commitment demands. President Trump's oversight and the tariff threat serve as enforcement mechanisms, while the January 2029 deadline imposes genuine urgency, compressing every quarter of implementation and magnifying the consequences of delays. For every American worker and investor, the bottom line is clear. This deal is real. 3 projects have been confirmed, representing $36 billion in first tranche commitments, alongside a $73 billion second tranche targeting energy infrastructure, including small modular reactors and gas generation. The $44 billion Alaska LNG project has gained financial viability, and tariffs on Japanese goods remain at 15% rather than the previously threatened 25%, lowering costs for cars, electronics, and industrial equipment. Beyond financial impacts, this framework supports strategic industrial renewal in semiconductors, critical minerals, AI power infrastructure, shipbuilding, and pharmaceuticals, directly countering China's supply chain leverage. This is far more than a simple check from Japan to the United States. It is a complex government-to-government investment mechanism combining JBIC financing, tariff enforcement, vendor preferences, profit-sharing models, regulatory hurdles, and ongoing debates over additionality. Whether the $550 billion headline commitment translates into hundreds of thousands of real American jobs by 2029 will be determined project by project, quarter by quarter, and worker by worker. The projects have already begun. Timelines are tight, and the gaps acknowledged by Japan's negotiator must be addressed. Whether this initiative becomes the largest bilateral industrial investment in American history, or the world's most expensive press release, will be resolved over the next 3 years of meticulous implementation. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.